On August 6, 1945, Japanese Army Chief of Staff General Yoshijiru Umezu stared in absolute disbelief at a dead telegraph line in Tokyo, realizing that an American B-29 had just vaporized Hiroshima from existence in a single blinding flash. What terrifying words did the Japanese High Command utter when they finally understood the brutal reality of the atomic age? Within minutes of the detonation, the Imperial Army General Staff faced a profound operational crisis as the central government recognized that no conventional bombing fleet had crossed the regional radar grids. The High Command knew there were no massive conventional fleets capable of leveling an entire metropolis in a single strike, nor were there any large stockpiles of explosives that could have triggered an accidental industrial catastrophe of such terrifying scale. Fragmented reports finally reached Tokyo through peripheral military networks, including an urgent dispatch from the Yamaguchi prefecture reporting a violent, special-type bomb that generated an extraordinary blast wave and a towering cloud. The communications network failed utterly. Panic spread. Operating from a reinforced concrete bunker situated on the grounds of Hiroshima Castle, 14-year-old student Yoshi Oka survived the initial blast wave and established a desperate connection with a military unit in Fukuyama to report that the city had been virtually leveled by a single, unrecognized class of weapon. These scattered accounts presented Army Chief of Staff General Yoshijiru Umezu and Field Marshal Hajime Sugiyama with a deeply troubling and structurally incoherent tactical picture that defied all existing military doctrine. The High Command faced a profound intelligence vacuum. Decisions stalled. On the morning of August 7, 1945, President Harry Truman broadcasted a public radio address explicitly stating that the United States had deployed an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, warning of an unprecedented reign of ruin if Japan refused immediate capitulation. The militarist faction of the Supreme Council for the Direction of the War responded with deep institutional denial and intellectual skepticism, led by War Minister General Korechika Anami, Army Chief of Staff General Yoshijiro Umezu, Navy Chief of Staff Admiral Soemu Toyoda, and Field Marshal Hajime Sugiyama. They dismissed the American assertion as a deceptive piece of psychological warfare, arguing that the destruction was merely caused by a massive conventional carpet bombing raid, or a liquid fuel air explosive. The leadership refused to believe the reports. Doubt paralyzed them. This skepticism was rooted in the High Command technical understanding of nuclear physics derived from Japan-owned wartime research projects, such as the Army NEGO program directed by Dr. Yoshio Nishina, which had concluded that the immense industrial resources required to enrich uranium made an American atomic weapon impossible by 1945. During urgent cabinet consultations, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo reported on the American broadcasts and argued that the introduction of such a revolutionary weapon completely undermined the strategic assumptions of the National Defense Plan, suggesting immediate acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration. General Anami and his military allies vigorously rejected this proposal, asserting that no political decisions could be carried out until an independent scientific investigation was verified on the ground. The cabinet split down the middle. Arguments grew fierce. To prevent public panic and preserve the authority of the military state, the High Command ordered the domestic press to refer to the weapon strictly as a new type bomb, while Admiral Soemu Toyoda presented a calculated strategic defense arguing that even if the Americans possessed a nuclear device, isotope separation limits meant they could not have more than one or two such weapons ready for deployment. The Navy High Command concluded that the United States could not sustain a continuous campaign of atomic bombardment, and that Japan should endure the immediate destruction, proceed with preparations for the decisive Battle of Kyushu, and assume that the worst of the technological surprise had already passed. The gamble was astronomical. Stakes reached their peak. To resolve the impasse between the diplomatic faction alarm and the military skepticism, the Imperial headquarters ordered the immediate dispatch of a high-level scientific and military investigation team to Hiroshima led by Lieutenant General Seizo Arisue and Dr. Yoshio Nishina. As the inspection aircraft circled over the Hiroshima basin on the evening of August 8th, The observers looked down upon a vast, featureless, ash-gray wasteland where a metropolis of over 340,000 residents had stood 48 hours prior. Dr. Nishina immediately recognized the distinct topographical signature of a nuclear detonation, while General Arasui insisted upon gathering concrete physical evidence on the ground before making any official admission to the general staff. The aircraft descended toward the ruins. Truth awaited them below. Upon landing at the Ujina military port facilities, Dr. Nishina utilized a series of rigorous scientific measurements to confirm the nuclear nature of the detonation by mapping the precise direction in which trees and steel structures had fallen, proving the explosion occurred in mid-air at an altitude of approximately 580 meters. The investigators measured thermal shadows cast on granite structures, noting that intense thermal radiation had reached temperatures between 3,000 and 4,000 degrees Celsius at the hypocenter, melting and blistering granite and roof tiles while leaving unexposed areas shaded. The physical evidence mounted rapidly. Doubt began to shatter. The definitive proof of a nuclear fission weapon was established when Nishina team detected significant levels of induced radioactivity in soil samples and concrete rubble near the hypocenter, alongside biological autopsies of victims showing total destruction of bone marrow and internal hemorrhaging indicative of acute neutron radiation. The team also discovered that unexposed photographic dry plates stored in the basement of the regional hospital had been completely blackened by high-energy X-rays and gamma radiation released during the blast. On August 10th, the investigative group convened a joint meeting to compare their findings and telegraphed a direct report back to the Central Military Command in Tokyo, confirming that the weapon was an atomic bomb. The scientific reality was undeniable. Panic gripped the researchers. For Dr. Nishina, the realization was accompanied by a deep personal and professional crisis as he concluded that those involved in Japan failed. Nuclear program had committed a grave strategic error that demanded ultimate atonement. Meanwhile, the physical confirmation of Hiroshima nuclear destruction exposed an irreconcilable division within the Supreme Council for the direction of the war, and the Suzuki cabinet over whether to prioritize state preservation or military honor. The moderate faction viewed the atomic bomb as a decisive political opportunity, recognizing that the technological superiority of the bomb provided a face-saving peg that allowed the military to capitulate without admitting defeat in conventional combat. However, the hardline faction maintained that accepting the terms without further concessions would result in the destruction of the imperial institution and the dishonor of the armed forces. The command structure fractured completely. Total disaster loomed ahead. The physical confirmation of Hiroshima nuclear destruction exposed an irreconcilable division within the Supreme Council for the direction of the war and the Suzuki cabinet regarding the immediate survival of the empire. The Japanese leadership split into two opposing camps, reflecting a fundamental dispute over the preservation of the state versus the preservation of military honor. The moderate faction, led by Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, Prime Minister Admiral Kantaro Suzuki, and Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, viewed the atomic bomb as a decisive political opportunity. Prime Minister Suzuki and Navy Minister Yonai, who had been working in complete secrecy from the army to find a path to peace, recognized that the technological superiority of the atomic bomb provided a face-saving peg. It allowed the military to capitulate without admitting defeat in conventional combat, attributing the surrender instead to a scientific miracle. Chief Cabinet Secretary Hisatsune Sakamizu expressed this view when he later remarked that the atomic bomb was a golden opportunity given by heaven for Japan to end the war. The primary objective of File Resource, the moderates, was to secure an immediate surrender on the basis of the Potsdam Declaration, with the sole non-negotiable condition that the sovereign status of the emperor be preserved. Opposing them was the hardline faction, led by War Minister General Korechika Anami, Army Chief of Staff General Yoshijiru Umezu, Navy Chief of Staff Admiral Soemu Toyoda, and supported by Field Marshal Hajime Sugiyama. This faction maintained that accepting the Potsdam terms without further concessions would result in the destruction of the imperial institution and the dishonor of File Resource, the armed forces. The political deadlock paralyzed the government. Tension reached a breaking point. Even after receiving Dr. Nishina confirmation of the atomic bomb, the militarists insisted on their 4 conditions for surrender, which included the absolute preservation of the state system, no Allied military occupation of the home islands, exclusive Japanese control over demobilization, and domestic jurisdiction over war crimes. General Anami and the Army General Staff were aware that these conditions were unacceptable to the Allies, but they believed that the strategic plan for the decisive defense of the homeland remained viable. They argued that the military could still inflict unsustainable casualties on the invading forces at Kyushu, forcing the Allies to negotiate a more favorable peace. When confronted with the prospect of total physical annihilation by atomic weaponry, General Anami delivered a fanatical defense of national self-destruction, arguing that national extinction was preferable to dishonorable capitulation. On the night of August 7th, Shigenori Togo and Korechika Anami held a long private conversation at the War Minister official residence. Togo attempted to persuade Anami of the futility of further resistance, and Anami candidly admitted that military defeat was only a matter of time. However, Anami maintained that the Army institutional honor and the spirit of the warrior code prevented any public concession. The diplomatic window narrowed. Time was running out. On the morning of August 8th, Shigenori Togo secured a private audience with Emperor Hirohito in his underground palace bunker. Togo presented the details of Hiroshima destruction and the American warnings in full. Deeply affected by the scale of civilian suffering and recognizing that the technological imbalance rendered conventional military strategies obsolete, the emperor intervened directly. Hirohito stated that the introduction of such devastating weaponry made it impossible to continue the war and ordered Togo to take immediate steps to end the hostilities without delay. The imperial command shattered the military monopoly on decision-making, yet the hardliners continued to obstruct any formal documentation. Bureaucratic resistance proved fierce. The cabinet remained officially deadlocked. The strategic situation of the Japanese Empire collapsed entirely on August 9, 1945, through a rapid succession of military and diplomatic shocks. Shortly after midnight, the Soviet Union formally declared war on Japan, in violation of the Neutrality Pact, and launched a massive, multi-front offensive across the Manchurian border. The Red Army quickly overran the depleted Kwantung Army, which had been reduced to a hollow shell to reinforce the defenses of the home islands. This offensive destroyed the High Command's last hope of securing Soviet mediation for a negotiated peace and exposed the empire to a potential two-front invasion, invalidating the basic strategic assumptions of the domestic defense plan. While the Supreme Council was deadlocked in an emergency meeting on the morning of August 9th, debating the Soviet invasion, news arrived that a second atomic bomb had been dropped, this time on the city of Nagasaki. The news of Nagasaki destruction directly demolished Admiral Toyoda's thesis that the United States possessed only 1 or 2 atomic weapons. The High Command was forced to realize that the United States had established an industrial pipeline capable of producing and deploying atomic weapons at regular intervals. The illusion of a limited American atomic stockpile vanished instantly. Panic swept through the General Staff. Despite these compounding catastrophes, the Big Six remained deadlocked 3-3 on the surrender conditions. Prime Minister Suzuki, recognizing that the cabinet tradition of decision-making by absolute unanimity had paralyzed the government, took the unprecedented step of convening an emergency imperial conference in the underground air raid shelter of the Imperial Palace at 2300 hours on August 9th. The conference, which proceeded into the early hours of August 10th, featured intense, emotional debates. General Anami, General Umezu, and Admiral Toyoda continued to advocate for a final suicidal stand on Kyushu, arguing that the honor of the military and the nation demanded a decisive struggle. Baron Hiranuma Kichiro, president of the Privy Council, aligned with Suzuki Group, bringing the vote to 4-3 in favor of accepting the Potsdam Declaration with the sole condition of preserving the emperor status. With the council still unable to reach a unanimous consensus, Suzuki approached the throne and directly requested that the emperor break the deadlock. The ultimate authority of the empire faced its supreme test. Silence fell across the underground shelter. Emperor Hirohito accepted the responsibility, declaring his support for the moderate faction proposal to accept the Potsdam Declaration with the sole condition of preserving the imperial house. Citing the catastrophic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the emperor delivered the historic sacred decision, stating that continuing the war could only mean destruction for the nation and a prolongation of bloodshed and cruelty in the world. He swallowed his own tears and gave his sanction to the proposal to accept the Allied proclamation. However, the imperial decision did not immediately end the crisis. Over the next several days, a faction of nationalist junior officers within the War Ministry and the Imperial Guard, driven by the refusal to capitulate, attempted to launch a military coup d'état on the night of August 14th. Led by Major Kenji Hatanaka, the conspirators seized control of portions of the Imperial Palace, seeking to destroy the phonograph recordings of the emperor's surrender broadcast and assassinate the moderate ministers. The rebellion threatened to plunge the nation into internal civil war. Loyalty faced a bitter division. The coup failed due to a lack of support from high-ranking generals. General Anami, caught between his absolute loyalty to the emperor command and his devotion to military honor, refused to endorse the rebellion. Hours before the public broadcast of the surrender, Anami committed ritual suicide at his official residence, leaving a suicide note apologizing to the emperor for his failures. At noon on August 15, 1945, the civilian population of Japan heard the voice of their sovereign for the first time. In the Jewel Voice broadcast, Hirohito announced the formal acceptance of the Potsdam terms. In explaining the strategic necessity of the capitulation to his subjects, the emperor pointed directly to the revolutionary and catastrophic nature of the atomic bomb, noting that the enemy had begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb whose power to do damage was incalculable. He warned that should they continue to fight, it would result in the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation and the total extinction of human civilization. The digital communication networks carried the historic words across a shattered empire. The war had finally reached its end. The realization that a single aircraft could erase an entire city had fundamentally transformed the Japanese high command calculus of war, bringing a definitive end to the global conflict. Yet the internal fractures that paralyzed Tokyo during those fateful August days exposed the terrifying vulnerability of supreme command structures when confronted with weapons of absolute technological supremacy. The generals who had staked their entire philosophy on conventional tactical attrition found themselves entirely obsolete in the dawn of the atomic age. The decisions forged in the underground bunkers of the Imperial Palace set a chilling precedent for the remainder of the 20th century, where the margin for command error was reduced to zero. The historical archives preserve the exact words, the frantic telegrams, and the agonizing debates of men who watched their entire strategic universe dissolve into radioactive ash. The legacy of that command crisis continues to resonate through the corridors of military strategy to this day. The lessons of Hiroshima remain an eternal warning to modern leadership. The psychological scars of the high command lingered long after the guns fell silent. The atomic age had begun. Reflecting upon the monumental collapse of imperial strategy, historians have long debated whether internal cabinet divisions or the sudden Soviet entry into the war dealt the final psychological blow to the military leadership. While hardliners like General Anami maintained that the armed forces could still execute a decisive defense of the islands, the physical vaporization of urban centers stripped away the fundamental premise of their tactical calculations. The psychological trauma experienced by the Supreme Council was not merely a reaction to defeat, but a profound realization that modern industrial science had outpaced human capability to govern its destructive potential. Every memo, every frantic cable transmission, and every desperate imperial conference underscored the terrifying reality of total warfare in the atomic era. The command structure had collided with an impenetrable wall of scientific reality. The transition from conventional strategy to nuclear reality was complete. The historical record stands as an unyielding testament to that pivotal crisis. The world was forever changed. Intelligence reports flowing into the Imperial General Staff from regional commanders in southern Kyushu revealed an alarming deficit in coastal defense logistics, leaving divisions dangerously exposed to expected Allied amphibious landings. Field Marshal Hajime Sugiyama inspected supply depots and discovered critical shortages of heavy artillery ammunition, anti-tank mines, and aviation fuel required to sustain the Homeland Defense strategy. The logistical network collapsed under strain. Disasters multiplied. Operating under the false assumption that Allied forces would delay their invasion until late autumn, the High Command failed to redeploy reserve divisions from northern Honshu to the anticipated landing beaches in Miyazaki. General Yoshijiru Umezu argued that rail transport capacity was utterly insufficient to move 200,000 troops across the mountainous terrain without exposing them to relentless Allied air interdiction. The transportation grid failed completely. Trains stopped. On August 11th, the Allied powers delivered their official response to the Japanese surrender offer, asserting that the authority of the Emperor and the Japanese government shall be subject to the supreme commander of the Allied powers. The hardline faction seized upon this clause as an intolerable violation of national sovereignty, arguing that acceptance would reduce the sacred imperial institution to a puppet of foreign occupation. General Anami rallied the junior officers by declaring that surrender under these humiliating terms was worse than national suicide. The political temperature soared, tempers flared. This fierce resistance was fueled by a profound miscalculation regarding the willingness of the Soviet Union to honor its neutrality pact, a diplomatic pillar that Tokyo foreign policy architects had relied upon for months to secure favorable peace terms. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo dismantled this illusion by presenting intercepted diplomatic cables detailing the rapid Soviet advance across Manchuria and the total collapse of the Kwantung Army defensive lines. The diplomatic facade crumbled. Reality struck. To prevent the total disintegration of the military administration, Admiral Suemu Toyota proposed launching a desperate naval sortie utilizing remaining surface combatants and Kaiten suicide torpedoes to inflict maximum psychological shock on the Allied invasion fleet off the coast of Kyushu. The Naval General Staff calculated that a final suicidal maritime offensive would prove to the American public that victory required an unbearable toll in blood and treasure. The operation demanded absolute sacrifice, crews prepared. The tactical reality on the ground rendered the naval suicide plan entirely obsolete, as American carrier aircraft launched continuous bombing runs against remaining industrial centers, destroying regional electrical grids and paralyzing wartime production facilities. General Arisu briefed the cabinet on the catastrophic depletion of conventional weapons reserves, confirming that infantry units defending the beaches were increasingly reliant on antiquated muzzle-loading rifles and bamboo spears. The military machine ground to a halt. Equipment vanished. The final hours before the Imperial broadcast witnessed a desperate internal struggle within the Imperial Guard Division, where Major Kenji Hatanaka and his conspirators attempted to forge official orders to isolate the palace and silence the communications network. Colonel Matsujiro Takeshita confronted General Anami in his private quarters, urging him to join the coup attempt or at least remain neutral to give the young officers a chance to alter the course of history. General Anami rejected the mutiny with absolute finality, stating that the sacred command of the Emperor was supreme and inviolable. The rebellion lost its anchor. Conspirators panicked. As the sun rose over the smoldering ruins of Tokyo on August 15, 1945, the military conspirators realized their coup had completely disintegrated, leaving Major Hatanaka to commit suicide in the plaza outside the palace walls while the radio stations prepared to transmit the imperial surrender message. Millions of Japanese citizens knelt beside their radio receivers across the devastated home islands, listening in stunned silence to the high-pitched, formal court language of the emperor, announcing that the war had turned necessarily not to Japan's advantage. The historical turning point arrived without precedent. Silence prevailed. The realization that a single technological advancement could render decades of tactical doctrine obsolete fundamentally altered global military strategy forever, closing a devastating chapter of human history. Yet the agonizing internal debates that convulsed the imperial command structure during those final August days serve as a perpetual reminder of the perilous friction between absolute political ideology and scientific reality. The historical record stands as an unyielding testament to the high command collapse under the weight of the atomic age. What lessons do you draw from the fatal hesitation of an empire facing absolute technological supremacy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.